Hello everybody in Facebook land at RTO Doctor Facebook page, and for those of you watching us from my own personal Facebook page or YouTube, LinkedIn, wherever you're following us from, welcome to today's 30 Days 30 Tips, the second series, and this evening's topic is on alignment. First of all, it's Sunday, so casual day for me today. So thank you for your patience and persistence while I do have time off for the weekend. But nonetheless, I wanted to talk to you about alignment because I've been giving some thought to the whole vet reform process again over the weekend and thinking about the approach that the government has taken in terms of believing or actioning at the very least that the TAE review is the be-all and end-all of what will make a much better strengthened vocational education training sector in Australia. And I started thinking about what it means for a vocational education training sector to be successful. And I think one of the things that I was thinking about was that it's not that different to life, really, and that for something to work successfully, it requires more than one. And the TAE is just one small part of the jigsaw puzzle. So what I mean by that is that when you started, when you started as a trainer and assessor, for example, or when you started as a CEO, or when you started as a compliance coordinator, or when you started in any role in administration, whatever that role might be in the vocational education training sector in Australia, what was your primary purpose? What was the reason why you chose to work in this sector? And I'd be very surprised if anybody said, apart from perhaps a CEO or an owner of an RTO, but I'd be very surprised to hear that it was financial. The reason why I say that is because the vocational education training sector, like any education sector in Australia, is not one of the most highly rewarded financially. And so for anyone to really make a huge financial gain out of being involved in this sector would mean that you would have to be doing something that is a little bit different and perhaps I don't know how to explain it, but there's definitely not a huge amount of money to be made when you're delivering quality education in the vet sector today. The level of compliance that is required to maintain your registration is now outweighing financially any real financial benefit that you can make as an RTO. And so I question whether or not anyone is really in this game for financial reasons, including consultants. And the reason why this is important for us to ask is because I think it forms a critical part of that equation or that jigsaw puzzle that I was talking about earlier in terms of what it is that makes the vet sector so problematic and challenging to fix. So one of the things that I was thinking of is that the TAE, the Training and Assessment Qualification, is not in and of itself the issue. What we seem to have is a whole jigsaw puzzle where each piece is another part of a puzzle that altogether forms the vocational education training sector. So, for example, you have a whole link, a whole chain of links of stakeholders who are involved in the delivery, assessment, and any part of the vocational education training sector. And this is particularly important when it comes to the student journey. So when you think about, for example, the enrolment of a student in the vocational education training sector in Australia, you have the student, you have marketing personnel, you have the CEO of the RTO, you have regulators, you have admin staff, you have trainers and assessors, you might have a compliance coordinator, compliance manager, you might have a course coordinator, there's a whole range of people along that chain of who is invested, who is a stakeholder for that particular student's journey. And so when we start to look at the different pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, it's not just down to trainers and assessors who have an impact on the way that student progresses through their journey with you. And it's not always by fixing the Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment, for example, that it's going to address all of the issues that are surrounding all of those stakeholders. So, for example, you can have fantastic trainers and assessors, but if you have a CEO, for example, who doesn't understand or appreciate the level of compliance or detail required for an assessment to be developed and for training to take place so that you can provide the student with an adequate assessment process, then it doesn't matter how good your trainers and assessors are, it doesn't matter how strong your Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment is. If the CEO, who is the ultimate leader and person who is responsible for the governance of that RTO, doesn't understand that process, then the two are never going to be in alignment. And it's the same with the student and the employer, for example. If you've got a student and an employer who don't value the same quality of assessment that your trainer and assessor or your CEO is requesting that they deliver, then it's not going to be fixed by fixing the Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment alone. It actually requires more pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. And so I started thinking today that perhaps it's more about questioning the desire and the need for quality and whose perception of desire, need and quality those things are, and how that impacts on the student's journey and how that impacts on training and assessment, and how whether or not fixing any of those things is actually going to make a better and stronger case for vocational education and training, not just in Australia but around the world. So, for example, you've got some providers who deliver cheap and nasty qualifications that are completed in a very short duration, for example. They may not have the highest quality training and assessment. They may not have the best trainers and assessors. But the reality is there are some employers and there are some students and prospective students who don't value those things, whose values and desires and needs are not in alignment with an RTO who is wanting to deliver that quality training and assessment. And so it doesn't matter how much you play around with a Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment, you're never going to be able to address that misalignment between what that particular student or prospective student and that particular employer wanted. If they wanted quality training and assessment and you've got an RTO who is delivering substandard assessments or substandard in accordance to the regulator's standards, for example, then that would be a different story. But at the end of the day, it is the perception of the student and the employer whose opinion is of the most value to determining whether or not that assessment is adequate and meets their needs. I think that sometimes we get a bit carried away and we don't contemplate the importance of the people who are purchasing the training and the people whose needs are more critical. So, for example, if I'm a student and I'm undertaking a qualification in the vocational education training sector and I need it for employment purposes and my employer just says, you know what, I don't care how you get it, how much it costs, just get it. I don't care if you do it in 2 days, 2 hours, whatever, just get it. Then the value that is placed on that perception of quality is going to be completely different to a lifelong learner who cherishes and values every moment of the learning and assessment journey. And they are desperately just trying to add more skills and knowledge to what they do on a day-to-day basis because it's their intention to be the best that they can be. So if you've got that misalignment, again, between the student and the employer and then another student, or you've got an RTO who doesn't understand that perception of need and desire, that misalignment's going to always be there, and no change of the Certificate 4 in Training and Assessment or training and assessment qualifications is ever going to change that. But I think that the issue at large then is that perhaps all that can be taken on board from a political perspective is to change the Certificate for in Training and Assessment, because changing people's perception of desire, need and quality is too hard. And it's something that's not going to win votes, and it's not something that is going to stop people banging on doors and saying, give me my money back, and, you know, all of this stuff that has been happening over the last few years. None of that is going to change if people at a political level are only investing in changing people's perceptions of the vet sector. And let's not forget too, and this is a whole different topic altogether, but let's not forget as well that there are some people and a large number of people who operate in the vet sector who have not really got a solid understanding of what value the vet sector has and contributes to Australia's economy on a day-to-day basis. They're so stuck in this higher education mentality and belief and attitude, and I can still hear one of my ex-colleagues, and if he's watching this, he's going to laugh, but everything that vocational education and training was and said and did, he used to say it just doesn't smell like higher ed. And it's a very common attitude and perception of the value of vocational education and training versus higher education, and yet the two have got an absolute beautiful balance and can really support and supplement each other if they're done properly. So just to close off on today, because it is Sunday night and it's getting quite late and I can get carried away and talk about this forever, but what I'd really like you to think about when you go to work tomorrow is, why am I doing this? What part of the puzzle am I? And is changing the Certificate for in Training and Assessment really going to change anything about the student's journey in relation to the environment that I work in? And I want you to think about, is the student and employer's perception of quality and need and desire the same as mine? Is it the same as the owner of the RTOs? Is it the same as the regulators? And if not, is changing the Certificate for in Training and Assessment really going to change that? If it is, fantastic. I'd love to hear the story. If it's not, I'd really love to hear some discussion about how we might be able to bring all of those pieces of the puzzle into alignment to create a stronger, healthier vocational education training sector that is meaningful to everyone who participates in it. So thank you very much for your time this evening. Thank you again for following RTO Doctor. I won't keep you any longer for tonight, but please do follow us for tomorrow's 30 Days, 30 Tips. And if you have any suggestions about topics that you'd like us to cover, or any particular time that you would like us to offer a particular topic, please provide that in the feedback, and I would love to be able to address that for you. In the meantime, I hope you have a lovely Sunday evening, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.